The light within the chamber of resonances was ancient, a soft, silver luminescence that had witnessed the rise and fall of stellar empires. It emanated from the crystalline walls themselves, each facet a repository of 1,000,000 years of memory, each glimmer a reflection of 1,000 adjudications. Here, at the heart of the Xylo's compact, silence was not an absence of sound, but a presence, a heavy, sacred thing woven from the gravity of history. High Adjudicator Kalen stood before the great holographic display, his elongated form silhouetted against the swirling nebula of data that dominated the center of the immense hall. His breathing was a slow, measured rhythm, a practice of control honed over centuries, yet it did little to quiet the disquiet that resonated deep within his core. The display was focused on a single star system, a common yellow dwarf unremarkable in every way save for one. Around it, where only the void should be, was a shimmer, a distortion, an impossibility. It was a structure of pure energy, a perfect spherical shell encasing the entire system out to its heliopause. It did not radiate or absorb in any conventional sense. It simply was asterisk, a flawless barrier of captive spacetime, its surface a mirage of bent starlight. The greatest minds of the compact, drawing upon the collective knowledge of a dozen elder species, had theorized such a construct. They had called it a stellar aegis, a theoretical megastructure requiring the energy output of a galactic core to create and the stability of a god to maintain. It was a myth, a thought experiment used to teach students the limits of physical law. The conclusion of every simulation, every theoretical treatise, was the same. It was impossible. The sheer gravitational and energetic forces required would tear the fabric of reality apart long before it could be completed. And yet there it was, humming with a silence more profound than the vacuum it contained, around the homeworld of the species known as humanity. The soft chime of the chamber's entrance echoed, and Kalen did not need to turn to know who had arrived. The presence of Grand Marshal Vorlag was a physical force, a disruption in the chamber's ancient calm. He was of the Vor, a species forged in high-gravity worlds, his massive frame encased in the polished obsidian armor of his station. His footfalls were heavy, deliberate, each one a statement of intent. He came to a stop beside Kalen, his multifaceted eyes fixed on the same impossible sight. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence stretched, filled with the unspoken weight of their shared disbelief. It was Vorlag, as always, who broke it, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the crystalline floor. "It is stable," Vorlag stated. It was not a question. His military analysts had confirmed it. "The energy readings are non-existent. It is a perfect closed system. Nothing escapes, not light, not gravity, not information. If not for the lensing effect on the stars behind it, we would not even know it was there." "And yet we do," Kalen murmured, his gaze tracing the perfect curvature of the shimmering sphere. "That is the message, is it not? They built it to be seen, but not to be understood. A statement of capability so profound it borders on a declaration of divinity." "Divinity or hostility," Vorlag countered, his voice sharp with pragmatic fury. "They have sealed their system, walled themselves off from the galaxy. Why? There are only two reasons a species builds a wall of such magnitude: to protect themselves from a threat they perceive, or to hide the weapons they are building to become that threat." He turned his massive head to look at Kalen, his multifaceted eyes glittering in the silver light. "Which do you believe it is, Adjudicator? Are they afraid of us, or do they wish for us to be afraid of them?" Kalen remained silent, his thoughts drifting back through the compact's limited history with the humans. A young species by galactic standards, barely spacefaring for a few of their own frantic centuries. They had expanded with a speed that was unsettling, a chaotic, disorganized tide of colony ships and automated probes. They were fractured, prone to violent internal conflicts that the compact had observed with a mixture of pity and contempt. They were emotional, illogical, their societies a cacophony of competing ideologies. The compact had dismissed them as a minor, if noisy power, destined to burn themselves out before they could ever trouble the galactic order. They were deemed too primitive, too divided, to ever achieve the kind of singular focus required for a project of this scale. The elders had said no one could build it. They had meant that no species, no matter how advanced, possessed the unity, the technology, the sheer audacity to challenge the fundamental laws of the cosmos on such a scale. The humans had proven them wrong. "I do not know," Kalen said at last, his voice a low whisper. "And that is what is most unsettling. We have always understood the motivations of others, Vorlag: greed, fear, ambition, survival. They are the universal constants of sentient life. But this is something else. The energy expenditure is beyond calculation. The societal dedication required to see such a project through to completion would have to be absolute, spanning generations. A species as fractured as humanity should have torn itself apart over the resource allocation alone. Unless they found a leader, Vorlag rumbled. A unifier, one who pointed their ambition outward at us. We are the ancient power that dominates this galactic arm. To a young, aggressive species, we are the ultimate challenge. He gestured a heavy, armored hand at the display. This is not a shield, Kalen. It is a fortress, a staging ground. While we are blind to what occurs within, they can prepare. They can build fleets. They can develop weapons based on whatever impossible physics they have harnessed to create that monstrosity. And when that wall comes down, it will not be a greeting party that emerges. Kalen felt a cold dread seep into his being. Vorlag's logic was sound, forged in the brutal calculus of 1,000 campaigns. It was the warrior's perspective, and it was often the correct one. He turned away from the display, walking slowly toward the center of the chamber. The silver light seemed to follow him, pooling at his feet. "And your recommendation, Grand Marshal?" "A preemptive mobilization," Vorlag said without hesitation. "We assemble the Grand Fleet. We position our forces at the edge of their sealed territory. We show them that their wall, however impressive, cannot protect them from the combined might of the compact. We demand they lower it, and if they refuse, we dismantle it. We cannot abide such an unknown variable on our borders. The stability of the galaxy, the great quiet we have maintained for eons, demands it." Kalen stopped, his back to the Marshal. The great quiet, the core philosophy of the Xylos Compact, a belief that the universe was best served by stability, by slow, predictable progress, by preventing the rise of chaotic powers that could disrupt the delicate balance. For millennia, they had been the enforcers of this peace, their fleets the silent guardians against galactic ambition. But humanity had not been ambitious. They had been quiet. For decades, their expansion had halted. Their noisy radio transmissions had ceased. They had withdrawn into their home system, and the galaxy had largely forgotten them, until now. To dismantle it would require a force beyond any we have ever gathered, Kalen countered, his voice soft but firm. The energies holding that construct together are theoretical. Our weapons may be useless against it. They may detonate against its surface with no effect, or worse, be turned back upon us. And what if you are wrong, Vorlag? What if this is not an act of aggression, but one of desperation? What if they have walled themselves in not to hide a sword, but to contain a plague? If we attack, we would be seen as tyrants, destroying a species in its moment of crisis. The moral authority of the compact would be shattered. "Morality is a luxury the secure can afford," Vorlag growled. "We are no longer secure. Their silence is more threatening than any declaration of war. They have rewritten the laws of physics in our backyard, and we do not even know their names. We must act from a position of strength. We must assume the worst, because in the history of the cosmos, the optimists are the first to be buried." The debate raged for what felt like an eternity, the ancient chamber bearing witness to the fundamental conflict at the heart of the compact. The warrior's fear versus the diplomat's caution. Kalen saw the potential for a catastrophic misunderstanding, a war ignited by ignorance and assumption. Vorlag saw an existential threat that had to be neutralized before it could fully awaken. They were both right, and they were both wrong. The truth lay hidden behind that shimmering veil of impossible energy in the silent heart of the human system. The full council was convened, the chamber of resonances filled with the holographic forms of the leaders of the dozen member species. The arguments were replayed, the data analyzed, the fear and uncertainty spreading like a contagion. Vorlag's faction, the militarists and the pragmatists, called for an immediate and overwhelming show of force. The scholars and the philosophers, led by Kalen, argued for a more measured approach, for an attempt at communication, however futile it might seem. In the end, as it so often did, the council chose the middle path, a compromise that satisfied no one but averted immediate conflict. A fleet would be sent. Not the Grand Fleet, but a significant portion of it, a force large enough to be taken seriously to demonstrate the compact's power. It would be a diplomatic mission, led by Kale and himself, but escorted by Vorlag's warships. They would travel to the edge of the Sol system. They would position themselves before the Great Wall, and they would wait. They would broadcast a message of peaceful inquiry, an invitation to talk. They would offer the humans a chance to explain themselves. The ultimatum was unspoken, but understood by all. If the silence continued, if the wall remained, then Vorlag would have his war. Kalen felt the weight of it settle upon him. He was being sent to speak to a ghost in a locked room, and the fate of galaxies could rest on whether or not it chose to answer. The journey was a long, silent vigil. The compact fleet moved through the void, a silent armada of polished obsidian and glowing energy fields, a river of steel and light flowing toward the silent, shrouded star. Kalen spent the transit in meditation, studying every scrap of data the compact had on humanity. He watched their ancient broadcasts, filled with chaotic art and brutal news reports. He studied their history, a dizzying cycle of creation and destruction, of breathtaking compassion and unspeakable cruelty. They were a species of profound contradictions, capable of building cathedrals and concentration camps with equal fervor. They loved their young and yet sent them to die in pointless wars. They dreamed of the stars and yet poisoned their own skies. They were, he concluded, a species at war with itself. Perhaps in the end they had achieved a final, terrible unity. Perhaps Vorlag was right. The thought was a cold stone in his gut. As they neared the Sol system, the Aegis grew in their viewports from a faint shimmer to a vast, all-encompassing reality. It filled the heavens. The star Sol was a bright smudge behind the shimmering curtain, its light twisted and distorted. The scale of it was an offense to the senses, a violation of intuition. Entire worlds could be lost in its immensity, and yet its surface was as smooth and featureless as a drop of water. It was beautiful, Kalen admitted to himself. Terrifyingly, unnervingly beautiful. The fleet came to a halt at a respectful distance, the warships fanning out in a crescent formation, their weapon ports closed but their energy signatures intentionally high, a gesture of peaceful intent backed by immense power. For days, they waited. They broadcast their message on every conceivable frequency, using the universal language of mathematics, physics, and simple pictograms. "We are the Xylos Compact. We come in peace. We wish to understand." There was no reply. The wall remained silent, impassive, its shimmering surface betraying nothing. The tension on the fleet's flag bridge was a palpable thing. Vorlag stood like a stone statue, his patience wearing thin with every passing cycle. His officers moved with a strained, anxious precision. They were warriors prepared for battle, and this silent waiting frayed their nerves. "They mock us," Vorlag rumbled on the third day, his voice low and dangerous. "They sit in their shell and watch us, testing our resolve. This is a deliberate insult, adjudicator." "Or they are deliberating," Kalen countered, his gaze fixed on the silent wall. "A decision of this magnitude would require consensus. We do not know what their political structure is now. We must give them time." "Time is a weapon they are using against us," Vorlag shot back. "Every moment we wait is a moment they could be preparing." Just as the argument was about to escalate, a soft tone echoed through the bridge. It was the communications officer, his posture suddenly rigid. "Adjudicator, Marshal, we are receiving a transmission." A wave of relief and anxiety washed over Kalen. He moved to the communications console, Vorlag at his side. "From the Aegis. Directly ahead, sir. It's not a complex signal. It's a simple audio-visual channel. No encryption. It is perfectly clear." On the main view screen, the image of the silent, shimmering wall was replaced. A face appeared. It was a human face, female, with pale skin and dark hair pulled back from a high forehead. Her eyes were a shade of deep brown and held a calm, unwavering gaze. She wore a simple, dark uniform devoid of rank or insignia. The background behind her was a neutral gray, giving no clue as to her location. She did not look frightened or arrogant or hostile. She looked patient, as if she had been expecting them all along. The silence on the bridge was absolute. Every officer, every crew member stared at the face on the screen. This was the first contact with the builders, the architects of the impossible, the being who represented the most terrifying and enigmatic power the galaxy had ever known. Then she spoke. Her voice was calm, the translation software rendering it into the Compact's formal dialect with flawless precision. There was no tremor of fear, no hint of aggression. It was the voice of a scholar, a diplomat, a being utterly in control. "This is Ambassador Eva Rostova, representing the unified peoples of the Sol system," she said, her eyes seeming to meet Kalen's directly across the void. "We acknowledge your arrival. Your message of peaceful inquiry has been received and understood. On behalf of humanity, I welcome you." Vorlag let out a low, almost inaudible growl. The sheer, unadulterated calm of the human was more unnerving than any threat. They sat behind a shield that defied physics, faced by a fleet of warships, and their first response was a polite, formal greeting. Kalen stepped forward, his own image being projected back toward the silent system. He inclined his head in a gesture of formal respect. "I am High Adjudicator Kalen of the Xylos Compact. We are relieved to have made contact, Ambassador. Your silence has been a source of great concern for the galactic community." The human Rostova offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Our apologies, we have been occupied. The final calibration of the Aegis required our full attention. We did not wish to communicate until we were certain of its stability." "The Aegis," Kalen said, the word feeling strange on his tongue. "You call it the Aegis. Our theorists deemed such a construct an impossibility, a violation of the fundamental principles of the universe, yet you have built it. We must ask why." This was the question upon which everything hinged, the reason for the wall, the purpose of this grand, terrifying isolation. The human ambassador held his gaze for a long moment, and Kalen felt as if she were peering into his very soul, weighing his intentions. "The reasons are complex," she said finally. "They are not easily conveyed through a simple transmission. Data streams can be misinterpreted, intent can be lost. True understanding requires presence." She paused, a deliberate, calculated silence. "We understand your concern. The appearance of the Aegis without context is understandably alarming. Therefore, we would like to invite you to send a delegation. A single vessel of your choosing. It will be granted passage through the Aegis to a neutral meeting point within our system. There I will explain everything. We will show you our work. We will answer all of your questions." The offer hung in the silent air of the bridge. It was both a gesture of profound trust and an incredible risk. Vorlag stepped forward, his armored hand clenching into a fist. "A trap," he hissed, his voice low enough that only Kalen could hear. "They wish to capture us, to take hostages, to learn the secrets of our technology." Kalen ignored him, his mind racing. A trap, possibly, but what could they possibly gain? They had already demonstrated a technological superiority that dwarfed anything the Compact possessed. What secrets could a single shuttle hold that were more valuable than the knowledge of how to build a star-encompassing shield? No, this felt different. This felt like an invitation to understanding. The only way to get the truth was to accept the risk. "Your offer is generous, Ambassador," Kalen said, his voice resonating with the full authority of his station. "And unexpected, we accept." Vorlag turned on him, his eyes blazing with fury. "Adjudicator, you cannot be serious. Place yourself in their hands is an act of supreme folly." "It is an act of supreme necessity, Grand Marshal," Kalen replied, not taking his eyes off the human on the screen. "We came here seeking answers. The only way to get them is to go to the source." He turned his attention back to Rostova. "We will dispatch a diplomatic shuttle. I will be leading the delegation myself." For the first time, a flicker of something new crossed the ambassador's face. It was not surprise, but perhaps respect. "We'll await your arrival, Adjudicator Kalen. Your vessel will be guided through a designated corridor. You have my personal assurance of your safety." The screen went blank, replaced once more by the shimmering, silent vista of the Aegis. The preparations were tense. Vorlag argued, pleaded, and all but threatened Kalen, but the Adjudicator's decision was final. The Grand Marshal would remain with the fleet, his finger on the trigger, a silent promise of retribution should any harm come to the delegation. A small, unarmed diplomatic courier was prepared. Kalen selected a small team, a xenolinguist, a theoretical physicist, and two of his most trusted aides. They were not a military force, but a delegation of scholars, a clear sign of their peaceful intent. As Kalen boarded the small vessel, he looked back at the vast, intimidating shapes of the compact warships. He felt the weight of their gaze, the hopes and fears of 1,000 worlds resting on his shoulders. He was a messenger stepping into the mouth of a creature of unknown and unknowable power, and he had no idea if he would be consumed. The shuttle detached from the flagship and moved slowly toward the shimmering wall. As it grew closer, the Aegis seemed to lose its ethereal quality, Beck. Oming a solid, tangible barrier of light, the ship's sensors, designed to analyze the most exotic cosmic phenomena, were useless. They returned only static white noise, as if the very laws of information broke down at its surface. The physicist on his crew, a brilliant Xylan named Lyra, could only stare at her console in a state of reverent bafflement. "It is not a shield in any way we understand," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It is a recontextualization of spacetime. It doesn't block energy, it redefines the reality in which energy exists. Adjudicator, what we are approaching is not engineering, it is theology." A calm, human voice filled their cockpit, speaking in flawless Xylan. "Diplomatic shuttle, we have you on approach. A corridor is opening at your designated coordinates. Please maintain your current velocity. Do not deviate." Ahead of them, a section of the shimmering wall began to ripple. The light twisted, folding in on itself, and a perfect circle of absolute black appeared, a tunnel into the heart of the human system. It was like staring into the end of the universe. Kalen's pilot held the ship steady, her manipulators trembling slightly on the controls. With a deep breath, Kalen gave the order, "Proceed." The shuttle slid into the darkness, and for a terrifying moment there was nothing, no light, no stars, no sensation of movement. The ship's instruments flat-lined. They were utterly and completely blind, adrift in a non-space between realities. Kalen felt his ancient heart thrumming in his chest. This was a demonstration of power beyond anything Vorlag's fleet could comprehend, the ability to simply turn off a section of the universe. Then, just as suddenly, they were through. Light flooded the cockpit, and the crew gasped in unison. They were inside. The star, Sol, burned with a pure, steady light, no longer filtered through the interstellar medium. The planets of the system hung in the black like perfect jewels. But the background was wrong. The familiar swirl of the galaxy, the distant nebulae, the sea of a billion stars, it was all gone, replaced by a soft, uniform, pearlescent glow. It was the inner luminescence of the Aegis. They were inside a sphere of pure light, a pocket universe of humanity's own making. The silence was absolute. They have unmade the night sky, Lyra whispered, her scientific mind struggling to comprehend the aesthetic and psychological implications. They have isolated themselves from everything. Their destination was a station in orbit around the gas giant Jupiter, a colossal ringed world that dominated their view. The station was vast but elegant, a structure of white and silver that seemed more grown than built. It was clearly a civilian installation, with docking bays for countless vessels and huge transparent domes revealing lush green habitats within. As their shuttle was guided into a docking bay, Kalen saw no warships, no weapon emplacements, no sign of the military-industrial complex Vorlag had envisioned. He saw only science vessels, cargo haulers, and what appeared to be city-sized habitats drifting in the quiet dark. They were met in the docking bay by Ambassador Rostova herself. She was taller than he had expected, and she stood with a poise that was both graceful and utterly immovable. She was flanked by two other humans, both in similar, simple uniforms. They were unarmed. There was no honor guard, no intimidating display of force. There was only the quiet hum of the station's life support and the ambassador's calm, welcoming gaze. "Adjudicator Kalen," she said, her voice the same measured tone from the transmission. She gave a slight bow, a gesture of respect he recognized from his studies of human customs. "Welcome to the Sol system. I hope your journey was not disorienting." "It was illuminating, Ambassador," Kalen replied, returning the gesture. "You have created a wonder and a source of profound fear for the rest of the galaxy." "Fear is born of the unknown," Rostova said, turning to lead them from the docking bay. "It is my purpose today to make our actions known. Please come with me. There is much to show you." She led them through corridors of gleaming white, past windows that looked out into the vast, silent space of the inner system. They saw humans of all descriptions moving about their business. They were not the frenzied, chaotic creatures of their old broadcasts. They were calm, focused, their expressions serious but not grim. They moved with a shared sense of purpose that Kalen had only ever seen in the most ancient and unified of species. It was the quiet confidence of a people who knew exactly what they were doing and why. He saw no soldiers, only engineers, scientists, and technicians. They entered a vast observatory, a hemispherical room whose ceiling was a perfect holographic projection of the space outside the Aegis. It was a simulation, a reminder of the galaxy they had left behind. In the center of the room was a large, circular table. Rostova gestured for them to be seated. As they settled, the projection on the ceiling shifted. It zoomed in on a dark, seemingly empty patch of space, light years from any known star. "Before I explain what the Aegis is," Rostova began, her voice filling the quiet room, "I must first explain why it was necessary. For generations, our astronomers and physicists studied the great cosmic mysteries. One of the most persistent was the Great Filter, the paradox of why, in a universe so vast and seemingly hospitable to life, we had never encountered another advanced spacefaring civilization. The Compact, of course, is an exception, a collection of elder species who have survived, but you are ancient and you are clustered. The rest of the galaxy is silent, eerily so." Kalen nodded. "The Great Quiet, it is a mystery we, too, have pondered for eons. We have always assumed that most species simply destroy themselves or fail to make the technological leap to the stars. That is what we believed as well," Rostova continued. "We assumed the filter was behind us, but one of our deep space observatories, a quantum entanglement telescope positioned far out in the galactic halo, began detecting something, an anomaly, not in energy, not in matter, but in the fundamental structure of spacetime itself. A subtle, pervasive dissonance. A decay." The physicist Lyra leaned forward, her professional curiosity overriding her fear. "A decay of spacetime? Ambassador, that is a theoretical impossibility. It would violate the conservation of energy." "It would," Rostova agreed, her gaze unwavering. "Unless the energy was being converted into something else, something we lacked the means to perceive. We called it the whisper. A background radiation not of energy, but of entropy. A slow, subtle unraveling of the laws of physics. The effect is infinitesimal on a local scale, easily dismissed as background noise. But over cosmic timescales, and for civilizations that rely on advanced technologies like faster-than-light travel, artificial gravity, and high-energy physics, the cumulative effect is catastrophic." She manipulated a control on the table, and the projection on the ceiling changed. It showed a simulation of a starship's warp drive. "A ship traveling through normal space operates on predictable principles. But in a region affected by the whisper, the quantum calculations begin to drift. Minutely at first, but with each successive jump, the error compounds. A ship aiming for one star system might arrive light years off course, or its drive might fail catastrophically, or it might simply cease to exist, its matter converted into the same unperceivable state as the missing energy. A cold dread, far deeper than the fear of any war, began to creep up Kalen's spine. Are you suggesting that the Great Filter is not a sociological phenomenon, but a physical one? That civilizations do not destroy themselves, but are eroded, unraveled by the universe itself? Precisely, Rostova confirmed, her voice heavy with the gravity of the revelation. The whisper is not uniform. It has currents, eddies, and dead zones. The region of space your compact occupies has, by sheer luck, been in one of these quiet zones for millions of years. It is why you have survived. It is why you are the elders. Other species like us, who emerged in more active currents, would eventually develop FTL travel, expand for a time, and then as they reached further into compromised space, their ships would fail. Their communications would degrade. Their empires would collapse not in a bang, but in a slow, silent fade to black, leaving only ruins and ghosts. The room was silent, the implications of what she was saying washing over the Xylos delegation. It was an explanation so vast, so terrifying, that it made all their political fears, their concerns about a human military threat, seem small and foolish. We discovered the source of this decay, Rostova continued, her tone becoming even more somber. Or rather, its focal point. The whisper is not a natural phenomenon. It is growing, spreading from a point in the intergalactic void between our galaxy and Andromeda, and its expansion is accelerating. She brought up another projection, a timeline of the galaxy. It showed the slow, inexorable creep of the entropic field, swallowing star systems, snuffing out the potential for life. According to our models, the quiet zone the compact currently enjoys will be gone within a few of your millennia. After that, your civilization will face the same slow dissolution as all the others. Kalen felt a profound weariness settle over him, the weight of 1,000,000 years of history. They had thought themselves the masters of the galaxy, the guardians of peace, when in fact they had been nothing more than fortunate children, playing in a quiet corner of a house that was slowly, silently collapsing around them. So the Egg he began, his voice barely a whisper. Is not a shield from you, Rostova said, finally revealing the core truth. It is a laboratory, a containment field. We could not study the whisper from within it. Its effects, however subtle, corrupted our instruments and our data. We needed a perfect, isolated baseline of reality, a control group. So we built one. We walled off our own small piece of the universe, creating a sanctuary where the laws of physics are pure and uncontaminated. Here, inside the Aegis, we can study the phenomenon without being subject to it. We can develop the technologies to understand it, and we hope to counteract it. She looked at Kalen, her eyes filled not with the pride of a builder, but with the heavy burden of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. We did not hide from you, adjudicator. We isolated ourselves to find a cure for a disease that will eventually kill us all. We remained silent because we had nothing to offer but a terrifying truth for which we had no solution. To announce it to the galaxy would have been to spread panic and despair to no end. We chose to work in silence, to bear the burden alone until we had something more than just a warning, until we had hope. The revelation was absolute, shattering every assumption, every fear, every preconception the compact had held. Humans were not aggressors. They were not conquerors. They were protectors. They had undertaken the most ambitious engineering project in history, not for power, but for salvation. Not just their own, but for everyone. They had shouldered a burden of cosmic existential terror and had not broken. Instead, they had built the impossible. They had locked themselves in a cage with a monster so they could learn how to kill it. Kalen looked at the human ambassador, and for the first time he did not see a young, chaotic upstart. He saw a maturity, a depth of purpose that humbled his own ancient civilization. They had been so arrogant, so certain in their own wisdom that they had never even thought to look for the real threat, the true enemy that was not a rival fleet but the very fabric of existence itself. Why tell us now? Kalen asked, his voice thick with emotion. Because we have made a breakthrough, Rostova said, and we can no longer proceed alone. We have confirmed the nature of the whisper. We have developed theoretical models to counteract it. But these are technologies on a scale even greater than the Aegis. They will require resources, knowledge, and perspectives beyond our own. We need help. We need the wisdom of the elders. We need the Xylos compact. The journey back through the black corridor of the Aegis was a stark contrast to the one that had brought them in. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound sense of awe and a shared, terrifying purpose. When Kalen's shuttle emerged back into normal space, back into the familiar starfield of the galaxy, he looked upon it with new eyes. It was no longer a realm of infinite possibility, but a finite and fragile ecosystem, slowly being poisoned from within. He stood before the full council once more, his holographic form projecting into the chamber of resonances. Vorlag and the other leaders listened in stunned silence as he recounted everything he had seen and heard. He presented the human data, the simulations of the Whisper, the models of cosmic decay. There was no argument, no debate. The evidence was irrefutable, the logic undeniable. The greatest threat to their existence was not the species that had built an impossible wall, but the reason they had been forced to build it. Vorlag was the first to speak after Kalen finished, his deep voice stripped of its usual aggression, replaced by a tone of sober reverence. They sought to protect us, all of us. While we debated their malice, they were laboring to save us from a doom we could not even perceive. He looked at Kalen, his multifaceted eyes conveying a depth of shame and respect that words could not capture. You were right to trust them, adjudicator. My fear blinded me. The decision of the council was unanimous. The compact fleet was no longer a guard, but an honor escort. Their finest scientific minds, their most advanced research vessels, their vast material resources, all were pledged to the human endeavor. A new alliance was forged, not of convenience or necessity, but of a shared, desperate hope. The elders of the galaxy, humbled and awakened, turned to the youngest of their peers for guidance. Humanity, the quiet, underestimated species, had become the linchpin of all sentient life. Kalen returned to the human station, not as a diplomat to a potential rival, but as an ally, a partner in the greatest undertaking in history. He stood with Ambassador Rostova in the same observatory as before, the two of them looking at the simulated galaxy on the ceiling. For a long time, they stood in a comfortable silence, the weight of their new shared reality settling around. Them, your people have accepted a great burden, Kalen said finally, his voice soft. To have known this, to have carried this knowledge alone for so long, I cannot imagine the strength it must have taken. Strength is not a choice when survival is the only option, Rostova replied, her gaze distant. We have a history of facing existential threats. Most were of our own making, it taught us. How to unify against the darkness, even if we had to create that unity from the ashes of our own foolishness. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. But our work inside the Aegis has revealed something more, something that complicates our understanding of the Whisper. Kalen felt a familiar sense of disquiet return. More? What more could there be? Rostova gestured to the projection on the ceiling. It shifted again, zooming past the galactic core, past the edge of their own galaxy, into the cold, black void between the great island universes. It focused on the theoretical point of origin for the Whisper, a place of utter emptiness. We built the Aegis to study the storm, to understand its meteorological properties, if you will. We assumed it was a natural phenomenon, a previously unknown law of cosmic physics. We were wrong. She amplified a signal from the data stream, a signal buried so deep within the entropic noise that it had taken all of humanity's computational power to isolate it. It was not random static. It was a pattern, faint, complex, and repeating. It was ancient, older than the compact, perhaps older than the galaxy itself. It was structured. It was a signal. The Whisper is not a force of nature, Rostova said, her calm voice now laced with an icy, chilling gravity. It is a tool. The decay is not random. It is engineered. The great filter is not an accident of physics. It is a policy. It is being broadcast. She let the statement hang in the silent room, its implications more profound and terrifying than anything that had come before. Kalen stared at the pulsing, malevolent signal emanating from the great void, his mind reeling. They had united to face a cosmic storm, only to discover that the storm was not weather. It was a weapon, and a weapon implied a wielder. This signal, Rostova said, her voice dropping to a near whisper as she brought up a nascent translation matrix, a ghost of a meaning flickering within the ancient pattern. It is not just a carrier wave for the entropic field. It carries something else, a message, a repeating single statement broadcast across the eons into the silent dark. Kalen leaned closer, his eyes fixed on the alien, terrifyingly simple symbols forming on the display. What does it say? Rostova looked away from the screen, her gaze meeting his, her human eyes reflecting the dawning, shared horror of their two species, united at last, standing on the precipice of a new and infinitely greater mystery. It says, she answered, her voice cold and clear, be quiet.